Cancel the council, King Nathaniel Blackwood said, his voice cutting through the chamber like winter wind. The woman who wrote this invitation died 3 years ago. Every noble at the long oak table fell silent. Snow pressed against the tall windows of Winterhold Palace, whitening the mountains beyond the glass, while the fire in the stone hearth snapped softly behind him. Nathaniel did not look up. His attention remained fixed on the cream-colored card lying beneath his hand. It had arrived moments earlier, carried by a white raven that had crossed more than 400 miles of frozen wilderness. There was no royal seal, no family crest, and no groom's name. Only a date, a remote chapel in Frost Hollow, and the name of the bride written in fading black ink, C. Whitmore. To anyone else, it was an ordinary invitation to an unimportant wedding at the edge of the Northern Territories. To Nathaniel, it felt like a voice speaking from a grave. His thumb moved over the final sentence. The ceremony will begin beneath the final winter moon. The last stroke of the word moon curved upward before falling sharply to the left. He knew that mark. He had seen it 47 times in letters that had appeared outside his private rooms during the darkest year of his reign. Those letters had never carried a signature. They had offered no flattery and asked for no reward. Their unknown author had simply reminded a lonely young king that anger was not strength, silence was not peace, and mercy did not make him weak. Then, without warning, the letters had stopped. Weeks later, his council had informed him that Clara Whitmore, a quiet omega employed in the royal library, had been arrested for stealing the king's seal. She had supposedly died when a prison carriage overturned during a winter storm. Nathaniel had never connected her to the letters. Not until now. Your Majesty, Lord Silas Crowe said carefully from the opposite end of the table, handwriting can be imitated. This may be an attempt to draw you away from the capital. Nathaniel lifted his eyes. Silas immediately lowered his own. Perhaps, the king replied. Yet the wolf beneath Nathaniel's calm exterior had already awakened, restless and certain. He turned the invitation toward the candlelight. A faint brown stain darkened one corner. Not ink. Blood. Omega blood, carrying a scent so familiar that his chest tightened before memory could explain why. Ethan Cole, captain of the Royal Guard, stepped closer. There is still no groom listed. That is not an omission, Nathaniel said. It is the message. He studied the first letter of each line. The words revealed themselves one by one, hidden in plain sight. He will bind me at moonrise. For 3 years, Nathaniel had believed the only person who had spoken to him without fear was dead. Now she had written from a forgotten town, hiding a plea inside a wedding invitation while someone erased the name of the man waiting at the altar. Nathaniel rose, folding the card with deliberate care. Outside, thunder rolled across a sky heavy with snow. Ready 12 riders, he ordered. We leave for Frost Hollow tonight. Clara Whitmore heard the chapel bell before sunrise, one hollow note drifting across Frost Hollow like a warning meant only for her. She paused beside the narrow window of the scriptorium, her ink-stained fingers resting against the cold glass. Beyond the village roofs, snow covered the valley in a clean white silence, hiding the road that led north toward Winterhold Palace. No riders appeared. No royal banners moved through the trees. Only the wind crossed the empty street. She told herself she had expected nothing else. 3 years had passed since anyone at the palace had spoken her name without contempt. 3 years since Lord Silas Crowe had placed the stolen royal seal inside her desk and watched the guards discover it. By nightfall, Clara had been called a traitor. By morning, she had been sent away in a locked carriage while the king she had written to 47 times remained unaware that the quiet omega from his library was the voice behind every unsigned letter. The carriage never reached its destination. A storm had broken the road apart near a mountain pass, and the family who found Clara half-frozen beside the wreckage had hidden her before Silas's men could return. The Whitmores of Frost Hollow had given her food, a bed, and a new name. They had asked for nothing until illness emptied their savings and debt placed their small farm in Gideon Vale's hands. Clara turned from the window as the scriptorium door opened. Gideon entered without removing his dark gloves. He was handsome in the polished way of a man accustomed to being obeyed, but there was no kindness in his gray eyes. "The invitation was delivered," he said. Clara kept her face still. "Then the ceremony may proceed." "You sound disappointed." "I sound tired." His gaze shifted to the writing desk where scraps of parchment lay beneath drying sheets of prayer books. "You were careful with the wording." Her heartbeat stumbled, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "You approved every line." "Every line I noticed." Gideon moved closer and lifted the small blade used to sharpen quills. He examined it, then returned it gently to the table. "The old laws are very particular. A bride's hand must write the vow. A moonscribe's hand makes the vow permanent." Clara looked down at her fingers. All her life, she had believed her precise script was merely a skill learned in the royal library. Gideon had taught her otherwise. Her bloodline carried an ancient gift. Words written by her hand could strengthen promises, expose false oaths, and bind commands to those who accepted them. That was why he wanted marriage. Not affection. Not companionship. Power. "The Book of Northern Oaths arrives before noon," Gideon continued. "At moonrise, you will write my name." Clara felt the hidden bruise of fear beneath her ribs, but she did not let it reach her voice. "Your name was not on the invitation." A slow smile crossed his face. "Because I wanted the king to notice." The room seemed to grow colder. Clara had believed the missing name was her one chance to reach Nathaniel. She had hidden a message in the first letter of each line, trusting that the man who had once studied every word she sent would see it. Now Gideon's calm expression told her the truth. He had not overlooked her plea. He had allowed it. "You wanted him to come," she whispered. "Of course." Gideon glanced toward the northern mountains. "A wedding requires a witness, Clara. And the vow I intend to write will require the blood of a king." Nathaniel rode through the storm with the invitation tucked inside his coat, close enough to feel its stiff edge against his chest each time the horse climbed another frozen rise. The road to Frost Hollow twisted through 40 miles of pine forest and steep mountain passes, but he barely noticed the cold. His thoughts had already traveled 3 years into the past, to a winter when the crown had felt heavier than iron and the darkness inside him had begun to answer every fear with anger. The first letter had appeared outside his private chamber after midnight. There had been no seal, no signature, only a single sentence written in careful black ink. "You do not have to become cruel simply because others expect you to be strong." He had read it twice, then ordered the guards to find the author. They found nothing. A second letter arrived 2 nights later. Then a third. The unknown writer never praised him. She never asked for money, favor, or protection. She wrote as though she could see the man beneath the crown, the exhausted young king who remained awake until dawn because sleep brought dreams of losing control. Nathaniel had begun to wait for those letters. He recognized the quiet curve of every capital letter and the slight hesitation before each final line, as if the writer always considered saying more. By the 20th letter, he knew she worked inside the palace because she mentioned the scent of old books after rain. By the 31st, he understood she had seen him alone in the royal library. By the 46th, he had almost gathered the courage to leave a reply. The final letter arrived unfinished. "Should the darkness ever take you, remember that gentleness is not surrender, and that even a wounded heart can still choose." The sentence ended there. A small brown mark stained the lower corner. At the time, he had believed it was spilled ink. Now, as Ethan Cole rode beside him beneath the lowering sky, Nathaniel knew better. "You have not spoken for 6 miles, Ethan said. That usually means someone has lied to you." Nathaniel kept his eyes on the narrow road ahead. "Silas told me Clara Whitmore died before reaching the northern prison." The report carried 3 official seals. All 3 passed through his office. Ethan absorbed that in silence. Snow gathered along his shoulders and darkened his blonde hair. "You believe she wrote the letters?" "I know she did." The certainty came from somewhere deeper than memory. His wolf had recognized the scent on the invitation, the same faint trace preserved on the 47th letter. Mate. The word had moved through him with such force that he had nearly dropped the card. He had spent 3 years mourning a woman whose face he had never truly known, though she had worked within a few hundred feet of him. He remembered a quiet Omega in the library, always carrying more books than seemed possible, lowering her eyes whenever nobles passed. He remembered once finding a cup of tea beside his chair after a difficult council meeting. No servant had claimed responsibility. Nathaniel had never asked whether it was Clara. "Your Majesty," Ethan said, pointing ahead. Between the trees, a pale light flickered and vanished. Not a lantern carried by a traveler. A signal. Nathaniel slowed his horse. The forest had gone unnaturally still. "We are being watched," Ethan murmured. Nathaniel reached inside his coat and touched the unfinished letter he had carried for 3 years. This time, Clara had completed the warning. She had not only called him to Frost Hollow. She had told him exactly when the trap would close. Moonrise. Nathaniel looked toward the darkening ridge where the first silver edge of the moon had begun to appear. "Then we are later than I intended," he said, urging his horse forward. Far ahead, hidden beyond the snowy hills, a chapel bell began to ring. Clara stood beneath the chapel arch while attendants fastened the plain white cloak around her shoulders, each silver clasp closing with a soft click that sounded too much like a lock. Outside, the bell continued to ring across Frost Hollow, slow and solemn beneath the rising moon. She could hear horses in the courtyard, but none carried the royal crest. Gideon had ordered the village cleared before dusk, claiming the roads were unsafe, and now the chapel stood isolated among dark pines and deep snow. Only his guards, 2 witnesses, and the gray-robed keeper of the Book of Northern Oaths remained. Clara looked toward the narrow window. Somewhere beyond those hills, Nathaniel might be riding toward her. Or he might already understand that the message was a trap and choose the safety of his kingdom over the life of one forgotten Omega. She would not blame him. A king carried thousands of lives. She carried only her own. "It is time," Gideon said from the doorway. His formal coat was black, trimmed with silver thread, and his expression held the calm satisfaction of a man who believed every possible outcome belonged to him. Clara followed him into the sanctuary. Candles surrounded the stone altar, their flames bending whenever cold air slipped beneath the doors. At the center rested a book nearly 3 feet wide, bound in pale leather and secured with bronze corners worn smooth by centuries. The Book of Northern Oaths. Clara felt its power before she reached it. The air seemed heavier around its pages, filled with old promises made by kings, pacts, and families long gone. "Place your hand beside the book," the keeper instructed. Clara obeyed, though every instinct urged her to step back. Gideon stood across from her. "When the moon reaches the highest window," he said, "you will write my name beneath the marriage vow." "And if I refuse?" "The Whitmore debt will be collected. Their farm, their home, everything they protected when they saved you." His voice remained gentle, which made the threat colder. Clara closed her eyes for one brief moment. The family who had hidden her had never known she carried royal secrets. They had simply seen a freezing young woman and opened their door. She could not repay kindness by allowing them to lose everything. Yet writing Gideon's name would give him more than a wife. It would give him access to every ancient vow connected to the Northern Crown. "Why invite Nathaniel?" she asked. Gideon's smile faded at the use of the king's given name. "Because royal authority cannot be taken through ink alone. The book must recognize his presence." Clara looked at the empty space beneath the vow. "You expect him to stand here willingly?" "I expect him to come for you." The words struck deeper than she wanted them to. Gideon leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You still do not understand what those letters meant to him. A lonely man can mistake comfort for destiny. A lonely king can be guided anywhere." Clara's hands curled at her sides. Nathaniel had never been weak. He had been wounded, burdened, and surrounded by people who admired his power more than they valued his soul. "You know nothing about him," she said. "I know enough." Gideon nodded to the keeper. The ancient book opened by itself, pages turning in a sudden rush before settling on a blank sheet marked with the crest of the Northern Crown. Lines of silver script appeared across the parchment. Clara watched the final instruction form beneath them. The bride shall write the chosen name before moonrise passes. Gideon placed a black quill beside her hand. Begin. Clara lifted it slowly. The chapel doors remained closed. No footsteps approached. No familiar voice broke the silence. Still, she lowered the quill to the page and wrote the first letter of the only name she had ever trusted with her honest words. N. The letter N shimmered silver against the ancient page, and every candle in the chapel bent toward it as though the room itself had drawn a breath. Gideon's expression changed. For the first time that evening, certainty left his face. "That is not my name," he said. Clara kept the quill poised above the book. "You told me to write the chosen name." The keeper stared at the glowing letter, his weathered hands tightening around the edge of the altar. "The book has accepted it," he whispered. Gideon turned on him. "Then erase it." "The Book of Northern Oaths does not erase a true choice." Clara felt hope rise inside her, small and dangerous. She had not completed Nathaniel's name, but one honest letter had been enough to delay the ceremony. Gideon reached for the quill, then stopped when the silver writing brightened. Ancient words appeared beneath the unfinished name. The chosen man must stand within the sanctuary before the final moon bell. Gideon read them, and his anger softened into something colder. "Then we shall wait for him." Clara understood at once. This had always been his plan. The book needed Nathaniel's presence, and her hidden message had guaranteed that he would come. Outside Frost Hollow, Nathaniel drew his horse to a stop at the edge of the village. No lamps burned in the windows. No smoke rose from the chimneys. Snow covered the main street without a single fresh footprint, although the chapel bell continued to echo from the hill beyond the houses. Ethan Cole studied the silent buildings. A village this size should have at least 200 people. "They were sent away," Nathaniel said. His wolf moved restlessly beneath his skin, warning him of watchers hidden among the trees. A lantern flashed once on the western ridge, then twice near the old mill. Signals passed through the darkness. Gideon's men knew the king had arrived. Ethan lowered his voice. "We can circle east and enter through the forest." Nathaniel looked toward the chapel tower, where moonlight shone through a narrow window nearly 60 feet above the ground. "There is no time." "That is what they want you to believe." Nathaniel reached inside his coat and unfolded Clara's final letter. "Should the darkness ever take you, remember that gentleness is not surrender, and that even a wounded heart can still choose." For 3 years, he had thought the sentence unfinished. Now he saw that it had always been complete. Clara had not been telling him to avoid darkness. She had been telling him that fear did not remove choice. He folded the page again. "Gideon expects a frightened king to rush into his trap," Nathaniel said. "Then we will disappoint him." He ordered 10 riders to remain beyond the village and protect every road leading back toward the valley. Ethan would take 1 guard around the chapel and locate the missing villagers. Nathaniel would approach alone. "Your Majesty," Ethan warned, "that leaves you without protection." Now Nathaniel looked toward the bell tower. "It leaves Clara with proof that I came for her, not for a battle." Inside the chapel, Gideon watched the highest window as the moon climbed closer to its center. The final bell rope began to move, though no hand touched it. 1 chime remained before the book would demand a completed name. Clara held the quill tightly, listening for horses, voices, anything beyond the wind. Then the outer courtyard gate opened with a long wooden groan. Footsteps crossed the snow, slow and unhurried. Gideon smiled. "Your king has arrived." The chapel doors remained closed, but Clara felt Nathaniel's presence before he spoke. His voice carried through the wood, calm enough to silence the entire room. "Open the doors, Gideon. She has already made her choice." The chapel doors opened without haste, and Nathaniel Blackwood stepped through the falling snow alone. His dark coat carried a dusting of white across the shoulders, but his face remained calm, his silver eyes fixed on Clara. For one suspended moment, the candles, the ancient book, and every person in the room seemed to disappear. Clara saw only the man she had once watched from behind library shelves, the king who had looked powerful enough to command armies and lonely enough to need 47 unsigned letters. Nathaniel saw the woman he had failed to recognize until the world had nearly erased her. His gaze moved to the silver end glowing on the page. "You wrote my name," he said. Clara's fingers tightened around the quill. "Only the first letter." It was enough. Gideon stepped between them. "She is confused, Your Majesty. The strain of the ceremony has made her uncertain." Nathaniel did not look at him. "Clara." Her name in his voice was not an order. It was a door left open. "Look at me." She raised her eyes. The final moon bell began to tremble above them, preparing to ring. Gideon placed one hand beside the book. "She agreed to this marriage. Her mark is on the contract." He unfolded a document bearing Clara's fingerprint and the Whitmore family seal. Nathaniel glanced at it only once. "A mark proves that her hand touched the page. It does not prove that her heart consented." The keeper lowered his head, as if the king had spoken a law older than the book itself. Nathaniel removed the sword at his side and placed it on the stone floor. Then he took off his crown and set it beside the blade. The room stirred with quiet disbelief. Without either symbol, he still seemed more commanding than every man present. "I did not come here to claim you," he told Clara. "I came to ask the question no one asked 3 years ago." Gideon's expression hardened. "This ceremony is lawful." Nathaniel finally turned toward him. "Then it will survive an honest answer." He faced Clara again. "Do you choose Gideon Vale?" The chapel fell silent. Clara heard the wind against the windows and the quick beat of her own heart. Gideon had the Whitmore's debt, the book, and enough influence to ruin the family who had saved her. Yet Nathaniel stood before her without a weapon, a crown, or a command. He had stripped away every reason she might fear answering him. "No," she said. The word came softly, but the ancient book shuddered. Silver lines spread across the page, breaking the false contract into fading threads of light. Gideon reached toward the book. "Stop this." The keeper stepped back. "The vow has rejected him." The final bell struck. Its sound rolled through the chapel, deep and clear. Gideon's composure vanished. "You think one word changes anything?" Clara lowered the quill. "It changed everything for me." A movement stirred near the side entrance. Lord Silas Crowe emerged from the shadows, his traveling cloak still wet with snow. Clara's breath caught. Nathaniel turned just as Silas lifted a small silver instrument toward the king's back. There was a sharp flash of light, and Nathaniel staggered forward as darkness rushed across his eyes. Clara reached Nathaniel before he fell, catching his arm as the silver light faded into the stones. His weight nearly pulled her to her knees, but she held on. Beneath her hand, his body had gone rigid, not from injury, but from something older waking inside him. Shadows gathered along the chapel walls and stretched toward the altar as if called by his rising fear. "What did you do?" Clara asked. Silas lowered the small silver instrument, his expression almost bored. "I reminded the king of what he truly is." Nathaniel's breath came slowly. His silver eyes darkened until they reflected no candlelight at all. The curse Clara had once sensed in every lonely line he wrote was no longer hidden behind palace walls. It moved through the room like winter pressure before a storm. Gideon stepped toward the Book of Northern Oaths. "Finish the bond," he ordered Clara. "Write the king's name, accept him as your mate, and the book will force his power under your control." Clara stared at the unfinished N. The solution appeared simple. If she completed Nathaniel's name and placed her own beneath it, the ancient vow might calm him. It might also bind him while he could not choose. She looked at the man struggling beside her. 3 years ago, no one had asked whether she was guilty. Tonight, Nathaniel had laid down his crown so her answer could be free. She would not repay that mercy by taking his freedom. No, she said. Gideon's voice sharpened. Without the bond, the curse will consume him. Then I will help him without owning him. Clara guided Nathaniel to the altar steps. His hands clenched against the stone, but he did not reach for anyone. Even in darkness, he was still fighting to protect the room from himself. Silas gave a quiet laugh. Kind words will not save a king. Clara turned toward the ancient book. The silver end still glowed, waiting for completion. She dipped the quill into the ink, then drew it away from the marriage vow. On the empty margin, she began writing the final sentence from the 47th letter. Remember that gentleness is not surrender. The words shone pale gold. Nathaniel's breathing changed. Clara continued, her hand steady despite the shadows circling the altar. Even a wounded heart can still choose. The chapel windows trembled as the book carried her words through every oath written inside it. Nathaniel heard her voice somewhere beyond the curse, beyond the fear Silas had awakened. He remembered the library after midnight, a warm cup of tea beside his chair, and letters that had never asked him to be less powerful, only more human. Nathaniel, Clara said softly. You are not the darkness inside you. You are the choice you make next. His hand opened. The shadow stopped moving. Slowly, he lifted his head. Gold replaced the darkness in his eyes, bright and ancient, like sunlight reflected across snow. The keeper stepped back in wonder. The eyes of the first northern king, he whispered. Silas's confidence broke. He turned toward the side door, but Ethan Cole entered with 2 royal guards and closed the path without drawing a weapon. Nathaniel rose beside Clara. The curse had not vanished, yet it no longer commanded him. He looked at Silas, then Gideon, with a calm more powerful than rage. You built your plan on the belief that fear removes choice, he said. Clara has proven otherwise. The Book of Northern Oaths opened wider, and hidden words began appearing beneath the old royal seals. Clara recognized Silas's handwriting at once. Silas's handwriting spread across the page in thin silver lines, revealing agreements that had been hidden beneath royal seals for years. Clara moved closer to the book, her pulse steadying as each sentence appeared. Payments to border lords. False reports sent to Winterhold. Orders written in Nathaniel's name but shaped by Silas's hand. Gideon's signature followed beneath several entries, confirming that the 2 men had worked together to weaken the northern pacts and turn fear into obedience. The chapel keeper read in silence, his face paling with every line. These records were sealed by the crown, he said. They could not have been altered without royal authority. Clara placed her fingertips near the glowing script. They were not altered by the crown. They were hidden beneath it. The book responded to her touch. More words emerged, including the order that had condemned her 3 years earlier. Her name appeared beside a charge of treason, followed by a royal signature that looked convincing from a distance. Nathaniel stepped beside her. His eyes had returned to silver, though a faint gold remained near the center. That is not my hand, he said. Clara studied the final curve of the signature. It is Silas's. Silas lifted his chin, but the certainty had left him. A book cannot judge the intentions of men. No, Nathaniel replied. But the woman you tried to erase can. Clara took the black quill and wrote a single phrase beneath the false order. Reveal the first hand. The ink flashed. Silas's hidden signature replaced the forged one, clear enough for every witness to see. Gideon moved toward the chapel doors, but Ethan and the royal guard stood calmly in his path. No weapons were raised. None were needed. The truth had already closed every exit. Nathaniel looked at Gideon. You used the Whitmore family's debt to force Clara into this ceremony. Gideon's expression tightened. Their debt is lawful. Clara turned another page. Not anymore. She found the contract bearing the Whitmore seal and traced the numbers written along the margin. Gideon had added interest never approved by the village court, increasing a modest loan until repayment became impossible. Clara wrote beside the amount, "Restore the honest sum." The false charges faded, leaving a debt small enough to be paid within a season. Gideon stared at the page as though the book had betrayed him. "You cannot undo my authority." "Authority built on deception undoes itself," Clara said. The keeper closed the book with both hands. By ancient law, both men must answer before the Northern Council. Ethan escorted Silas and Gideon toward the side chamber, where they would remain under guard until dawn. When the doors closed, the chapel became quiet again. Nathaniel retrieved his crown from the floor but did not place it on his head. Instead, he turned toward Clara. "I believed the report of your death," he said. "I accepted a convenient truth because searching for the real one would have forced me to question the people closest to my throne." Clara heard no excuse in his voice, only regret. "You did not know." "A king is responsible for what he refuses to know." Then, before the keeper, the guards, and the ancient book, Nathaniel lowered himself to one knee. Clara's breath caught. "Your Majesty, please stand." "Not until I say this." He looked up at her without pride or command. "You were accused in my name, abandoned under my law, and hunted by men who believed your silence protected them. I cannot return those years to you. I can only promise that your voice will never again be treated as something small." The Book of Northern Oaths opened by itself. On a clean page, silver words slowly appeared. "The North awaits the name of its true queen." Clara stared at the sentence, then at Nathaniel. The book was offering a crown. Nathaniel, however, reached forward and gently closed it. "Not tonight," he said. "No ancient power will choose for her." 3 months later, winter still covered the northern territories, but Frost Hollow no longer felt like a place forgotten by the world. The Whitmore farm had been restored, the village roads reopened, and every false debt connected to Gideon Vale had been erased from the official records. Clara remained at Winterhold Palace, not as a prisoner, a servant, or a promised queen, but as the newly appointed keeper of royal oaths. Her office stood beside the great library where she had once worked in silence. Now nobles waited outside her door and spoke her name with care, because every law bearing the royal seal had to pass beneath her honest hand. Nathaniel never asked her to complete the vow from the chapel. He gave her rooms overlooking the western gardens, access to every hidden record in the palace, and the freedom to leave whenever she wished. That freedom mattered more than any crown. He visited her often, sometimes with official documents and sometimes with 2 cups of tea, but he never entered without knocking. Slowly, Clara learned the difference between being watched and being seen. Nathaniel remembered which books made her smile. He listened when she disagreed with him. When the darkness of his curse stirred, he did not demand that she calm it. He simply told her the truth, and together they waited for it to pass. On the first night of the Winter Moon Festival, music filled the palace courtyard while hundreds of lanterns glowed beneath the snow-covered trees. Clara stood near the fountain in a deep blue cloak, watching children send small paper stars across the frozen water. Nathaniel approached without his crown. In his hand was the cream-colored card that had changed both their lives. The bloodstain had faded, but the blank space remained. "I thought this belonged to you," he said. Clara accepted it carefully. "You kept it." "I kept every word you ever wrote." He offered her a silver pen. "But I will not write this one." Around them, the celebration continued. No council waited for an answer. No ancient book demanded a name. Nathaniel stood quietly, giving her room to choose. Clara looked down at the empty line. "What happens if I leave it blank?" "Then it stays blank." "And if I write your name?" His silver eyes held hers. "Then I spend the rest of my life honoring the fact that you chose it." Clara placed the card against the stone edge of the fountain. Her hand did not tremble as she wrote Nathaniel Blackwood in clear black ink. Before adding her own name, she paused. "Do you choose me as I am now?" she asked. Not the girl from the library. Not the voice in those letters. Not the woman the book called a queen. Nathaniel stepped closer, though he left enough space for her to turn away. I came to Frost Hollow because of the woman who wrote those letters, he said. I stayed because of the woman who refused to take my choice, even when it could have saved her. I choose Clara Whitmore, who survived what should have silenced her and still used her voice to protect others. Warmth gathered behind her eyes. Clara signed her name. A soft golden light moved across the card, not binding them, but recognizing what had already been freely given. Nathaniel held out his hand. She placed hers in it. He did not pull her toward him. He waited until she stepped beside him. Beneath the winter lanterns, the King of the North and the Omega once erased from his kingdom walked into the celebration together. The first vow had carried no name because Clara had possessed no choice. The second carried the king's name because every word belonged to her.